I was sitting on my back deck in Boulder, Colorado, watching the sun set over the Flatirons when I first noticed the surveying stakes driven into my hillside property. They were bright orange plastic, the kind that's screaming at you from 50 yards away, and they definitely were not there when I left for work that morning. My name is Aaron Quincy, and I had been living in the Meadowbrook Hills subdivision for 3 years. The property was unique because my lot extended up a steep hillside that nobody else wanted to deal with. When I bought the place, the previous owner practically threw in the extra 2 acres of vertical terrain for nothing. I loved it. The slope was too steep to build on under normal circumstances, covered in scrub oak and native grasses, but it gave me privacy and a buffer from the neighbors above. I walked down my deck stairs and hiked up the slope, my boots slipping slightly on the loose soil. There were at least a dozen stakes forming what looked like 2 rectangular outlines. Each stake had pink ribbon tied to it, fluttering in the evening breeze. My chest tightened. This was definitely my property. I had the survey done when I purchased the house, and I knew exactly where my boundaries lay. The next morning, I took a personal day from my software engineering job and waited. Sure enough, around 9 o'clock, a truck pulled up to the base of the hillside, followed by a sedan. 3 men got out of the truck and started unloading equipment. From the sedan emerged a woman I recognized immediately as Patricia Hendricks, the president of the Meadowbrook Hills Homeowners Association. Patricia was in her mid-50s, with shoulder-length blonde hair that had that overly processed look, and she wore a pantsuit that seemed absurdly formal for a construction site. She carried a clipboard like it was a royal scepter. I walked down my driveway to meet them. Morning. Can I help you folks with something? Patricia turned to me with a smile that did not reach her eyes. Aaron, good morning. We are just beginning the installation of the community storage facilities that were approved at last month's board meeting. Community storage facilities, I repeated slowly. On my property. Her smile tightened. Well, actually, according to the HOA bylaws, any slope exceeding a 30-degree grade that is deemed unbuildable by county standards falls under community management for the collective benefit of all residents. I stared at her. That's not how property ownership works. This is my land. I have the deed and the survey. She flipped through papers on her clipboard. Yes, but when you purchased your home, you signed the HOA agreement. Section 17. Subsection D clearly states that certain parcels may be designated for community use when the board determines it serves the greater good. I read that section. It refers to common areas like parks and pathways, not private property. Patricia's expression hardened. Our attorney has reviewed the language and determined it applies to this situation. We will be constructing 2 tool storage sheds to house community maintenance equipment. The current storage situation is inadequate, and your hillside is the only suitable location. One of the workers, a guy with a thick mustache and a tool belt, looked uncomfortable. Madam, if there's a property dispute, maybe we should wait until there is no dispute. Patricia cut him off. Proceed with the foundation work. I pulled out my phone. I'm calling my lawyer right now. Do not put a single shovel in this ground until this is resolved. Patricia shrugged. Do what you feel you need to do, Aaron, but we have every right to proceed. The board voted unanimously. I spent the next 2 hours on the phone. First with my real estate attorney, Jennifer Wu, who was as confused as I was about the HOA's interpretation. She promised to send a cease and desist letter immediately. Then with the county planning office, where I learned that Patricia had somehow obtained a building permit listing the HOA as the applicant for my address. That's fraud, Jennifer said when I called her back with that information. They cannot apply for permits on property they do not own. Can you get an injunction? I will file for one this afternoon, but it might take a few days to get a hearing. In the meantime, do not do anything to escalate the situation. By the time I got off the phone, the workers had packed up and left. Patricia's car was gone too. I hiked back up the hillside and found that they had managed to dig preliminary holes for foundation posts. The orange stakes were still in place, and now there were piles of excavated dirt and rock. That evening, I knocked on the door of my neighbor, Frank Morrison, who lived 3 houses down. Frank was retired military, somewhere in his 60s, and had always struck me as reasonable. "Aaron, come in," he said, gesturing me inside. "What's going on?" I explained the situation. Frank's expression grew darker as I talked. "I was at that board meeting," he said finally. "Patricia brought up the storage shed idea, but she said they would be built on the empty lot at the entrance to the subdivision. The lot the HOA actually owns. Did anyone vote against it?" "Nobody voted at all. She said she would send around an email ballot. I never got one." He rubbed his jaw. "This is typical Patricia. She's been trying to run this place like her personal kingdom since she got elected. Did she run unopposed, basically? The previous president moved away, and nobody else wanted the headache. Patricia volunteered, and suddenly we had all these new rules. Fines for trash cans being visible from the street, mandatory landscaping inspections, rules about what kind of mailboxes we can have. I felt a plan beginning to form in my mind, but I needed more information first. Who else is on the board? Vanessa Ortiz is the treasurer. She's reasonable, has a young family, pretty busy. Then there's Martin Walsh as secretary. He is basically Patricia's yes man. And Carol Dennison rounds it out as a general board member. Carol's nice but kind of passive. Over the next 3 days, nothing happened on the hillside. My attorney filed for the injunction, and we had a hearing scheduled for the following week. I used the time to do research, pulling up every HOA document I could find, reviewing my purchase agreement, and most importantly, looking into Patricia's background. Turns out Patricia Hendricks had been involved in 2 previous HOA disputes at her last neighborhood in Thornton before moving to Boulder. One resulted in a lawsuit that she lost. The other was settled quietly. She had a pattern of overstepping her authority and interpreting rules in creative ways that benefited her vision of how things should be. On the 4th day, I woke to the sound of machinery. I looked out my bedroom window and saw a small crane positioned at the base of my hillside. 2 flatbed trucks were parked behind it, loaded with lumber, metal roofing panels, and what looked like prefabricated shed walls. I threw on clothes and ran outside. Patricia was there again, along with Martin Walsh, a thin man with wire-rimmed glasses who always looked worried about something. "You received the cease and desist letter," I called out as I approached. "You cannot build here." Patricia did not even look up from her clipboard. "We received a letter from your attorney, yes. Our attorney reviewed it and determined it has no legal merit. We are proceeding as planned. We have a court hearing in 4 days. Then, if the judge agrees with you, we will remove the structures. Until then, we are exercising what we believe to be our rights." Martin shifted his weight nervously. "Patricia, maybe we should wait for the hearing, just to be safe." "Martin, we have already delayed the project by 4 days. The workers are here, the materials are paid for. We are moving forward." I took a deep breath, trying to stay calm. "If you build these sheds and the judge rules they are on my private property, you will be responsible for all removal costs plus damages." "Noted," Patricia said dismissively. She turned to the construction foreman. "Please begin." I called Jennifer immediately. She was furious but explained that without the injunction in place, there was not much I could do to physically stop them. "Document everything," she instructed. "Photos, videos, times, dates. Keep records of everyone who is there. This will help our case." So that's what I did. I set up my phone on a tripod and recorded the entire construction process. I took photos from multiple angles. I noted arrival and departure times. I watched as they used a crane to lift materials up my hillside, how they bolted together prefabricated shed frames, installed metal roofs, and even poured concrete pads that they somehow failed to mention before. The two sheds were substantial, each about 12 by 16 feet. They were not cheap looking either. These were quality structures with proper siding, weatherproof doors, and ventilation systems. Patricia was clearly planning for these to be permanent. The construction took 2 full days. By the evening of the second day, I had 2 brand new tool sheds sitting on my hillside property, gleaming in the fading sunlight like monuments to administrative overreach. The court hearing arrived on Monday morning. I wore my best suit and met Jennifer at the Boulder County Courthouse. Patricia showed up with the HOA's attorney, a sleek-looking man in his 40s named Richard Foster. The hearing was before Judge Elizabeth Hayward, a no-nonsense woman in her 60s with a reputation for cutting through legal wordplay. She reviewed both sides' submissions, then looked up at Richard Foster. "Counselor, explain to me how your client obtained a building permit for property they do not own." Richard stood smoothly. "Your Honor, the HOA's position is that the property in question falls under the Community Management Clause of the Association bylaws. While Mr. Quincy holds the deed to the entire parcel, the bylaws create a framework whereby certain portions can be designated for collective use. Have similar designations been made on other properties in this HOA? Not to date, Your Honor, but this is the first instance where the need has arisen." Judge Hayward turned to Jennifer. "Miss Wu, your position." Jennifer stood. "Your Honor, this is a straightforward case of trespass and possibly fraud. Mr. Quincy owns the property outright. The HOA bylaws do not and cannot override deed ownership. The clause they cite refers explicitly to common areas and properties deeded to the HOA, not private residential lots. Furthermore, they obtained building permits fraudulently by misrepresenting their ownership status. Mr. Foster, do you have case law supporting your interpretation of these bylaws?" Richard hesitated. "Your Honor, we believe this is a novel situation that requires judicial interpretation of the bylaw's intent. So that's a no." Judge Hayward flipped through the documents again. "I have reviewed the HOA bylaws in question. The language is clear. Section 17, subsection D refers to common areas and properties held in trust by the association for the benefit of residents. Mr. Quincy's hillside is neither. It is his private property, purchased with a deed that includes that land, and your client has no claim to it whatsoever." Patricia, sitting behind her attorney, looked like she had bitten into a lemon. Judge Hayward continued, "I am issuing an immediate injunction against any further construction or use of the structures. The HOA is ordered to remove the sheds within 30 days at their own expense and restore the property to its original condition. Mr. Quincy is entitled to seek damages for the unauthorized use of his property and any legal fees incurred. This hearing is adjourned." The gavel came down. Jennifer squeezed my shoulder and whispered, "That was as decisive as it gets." Outside the courtroom, Patricia intercepted us. Her face was flushed. "This is not over. We will be filing an appeal." "You will lose," Jennifer said calmly. "And every day those structures remain on my client's property after the 30-day deadline, you will be racking up additional trespass damages. I suggest you cut your losses." Patricia's mouth pressed into a thin line before she turned and walked away, Richard Foster trailing behind her looking uncomfortable. That evening I sat on my deck with a beer, looking up at the sheds. They were nice sheds, really. Well built, weatherproof, plenty of storage space. And they were sitting on my property, installed at the HOA's expense. An idea that had been percolating in my mind since the construction started suddenly crystallized. I pulled out my phone and called Jennifer. "I have a potentially crazy idea," I said. "Hear me out." I explained my plan. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. "It's risky," Jennifer finally said, "but legally sound, and honestly, kind of brilliant." The next morning, I drafted a formal letter to the HOA board. In it, I acknowledged the court's ruling and their requirement to remove the sheds within 30 days. However, I also noted that the sheds were currently sitting on my private property without my permission. Any items stored within those sheds were therefore being stored on my private property without my authorization. Under Colorado property law, I was entitled to charge reasonable storage fees for unauthorized use of my land. I had researched commercial storage rates in Boulder and found that climate-controlled storage units ran about $2 per square foot per month. The two sheds totaled 384 square feet. I was charging slightly above market rate given the premium Hillside location. $3 per square foot per month, totaling $1,152 monthly. Furthermore, I stated in the letter, I would not be consenting to the removal of the sheds until all accrued storage fees were paid in full. The sheds could remain on my property for as long as necessary, accumulating fees daily, until such time as the HOA chose to pay the outstanding balance and remove them. I had the letter notarized and sent it certified mail to Patricia and each board member individually, as well as to Richard Foster. The response came within 48 hours. Patricia called an emergency HOA board meeting and demanded I attend. The meeting was held at the community center, a small building near the subdivision entrance that hosted everything from neighborhood gatherings to the annual 4th of July barbecue. I arrived to find about 20 residents already there, far more than typically attended these meetings. Word had gotten out about the shed situation, and people were curious. Frank Morrison gave me a nod from the back row. I noticed Vanessa Ortiz, the treasurer, looking stressed. Patricia called the meeting to order and immediately launched into a speech about how I was being unreasonable and vindictive. "The court has ruled in Mr. Quincy's favor," she said, her voice tight with barely controlled anger. "We have agreed to remove the structures. But now he is trying to extort the HOA by demanding exorbitant storage fees. This is nothing but a cash grab and a waste of our community resources." I raised my hand. "May I respond?" Patricia looked like she wanted to say no, but several residents called out for her to let me speak. I stood up. "The sheds were built on my property without my permission. That's trespassing. Patricia and the board knew they were taking a risk when they proceeded with construction despite the cease and desist letter. They gambled and lost. Now there are consequences." "The court ordered us to remove them," Martin Walsh said weakly. "The court gave you 30 days to remove them. It's been 4 days. You have 26 days left." But here is the thing. Any equipment, tools, or materials you store in those sheds during that time is being stored on my private property. I'm entitled to charge for that storage. If you do not like the fee, do not use the sheds. Remove them now. Problem solved. Vanessa spoke up. "How much have you stored in there already, Patricia?" Patricia's face reddened. "That's not relevant to this discussion." "Actually, it is," Vanessa insisted. "I'm the treasurer. I need to know what our potential liability is." A resident in the third row, a woman named Helen something, called out. I saw workers loading riding mowers and other equipment in there 3 days ago, right after the court hearing. The room erupted in conversation. Patricia banged a gavel on the podium, which seemed overly dramatic. Order. We will handle this matter appropriately. I spoke up again. I am not being unreasonable. You have two options. Remove the sheds immediately and get your equipment out, or pay the storage fees for however long it takes you to organize removal. Those are the only options that do not involve me taking you back to court for continued trespass. Frank stood up. I move that we vote to remove the sheds immediately within the next week to minimize costs. Second, someone called out. Patricia looked panicked. We cannot make that decision without proper planning. We need to find alternative storage, coordinate contractors, arrange removal of the equipment first. You had 3 years to plan proper storage, Frank countered. You created this mess by rushing to build on Aaron's property. Now we need to minimize the damage to the HOA's finances. The vote was held. 18 residents in favor of immediate removal, 3 opposed. Patricia was forced to accept the motion. But here is where things got interesting. After the meeting, as people filed out, Patricia pulled me aside. Martin and Richard Foster were with her. You have made your point, Patricia said, her voice low and strained. What do you really want? I want exactly what I said. Payment for the storage of your equipment on my property and removal of the structures you built without permission. Richard cleared his throat. Perhaps we can reach a settlement. The HOA could pay you a lump sum to drop the storage fees, and we will have the sheds removed within 2 weeks. How much equipment have you stored in there? Patricia and Richard exchanged glances. There was something they were not telling me. The sheds are fully stocked, Patricia finally admitted. We have 2 riding mowers, multiple push mowers, trimmers, blowers, hand tools, ladders, safety equipment, fertilizer, seed, irrigation parts, and seasonal decorations. The board had approved purchasing all new community maintenance equipment to save on contracted landscaping costs. I did quick math in my head. So you are telling me you spent probably $30,000 on equipment and supplies, and it's all sitting in those sheds right now. The exact figure is not important, Richard said quickly. It's $32,000, Vanessa said, appearing behind us. She looked furious. Patricia, I did not approve those purchases. That's way over your spending authority. Patricia whirled on her. I have discretion for community improvements. Up to $5,000. Anything more needs full board approval and a member vote for expenditures over $15,000. That's in the bylaws you claim to follow so carefully. The pieces were clicking into place. Patricia had spent HOA money without proper authorization, built illegal structures to house that equipment, and was now in a position where she could not access the equipment without paying my storage fees or admit to the full board and community what she had done. This is an internal HOA matter, Richard said, trying to regain control. Mr. Quincy, we will have a settlement offer for you by Friday. I looked at Vanessa. As treasurer, do you have access to the shed? I have keys, she confirmed. Patricia gave them to all board members. I would like to schedule an inventory of what's being stored on my property. Tomorrow morning work for you, Vanessa nodded. 10 o'clock. Patricia started to object, but Richard put a hand on her arm. That's reasonable. We will be there as well. The next morning felt like a strange kind of treasure hunt. I met Vanessa, Patricia, Martin, and Richard at the base of my hillside. We hiked up the slope to the sheds. Patricia unlocked the first one. I had expected it to be full, but I was not prepared for how full. The shed was packed from floor to ceiling with equipment. 2 commercial-grade riding mowers dominated the space. their bright green paint gleaming. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with power tools still in their boxes, pruning equipment, safety gear, and enough landscaping supplies to maintain a golf course. The second shed was similarly packed. Ladders hung from ceiling hooks. Large bins contained seasonal decorations, everything from Halloween inflatables to Christmas lights. More shelves held irrigation components, fertilizer bags, and what looked like a complete set of holiday banners for every occasion. Vanessa was taking photos and notes on her tablet. Her expression grew increasingly troubled. "Patricia, this is more than $32,000. Some of this equipment I have never seen receipts for." "The receipts are all filed properly," Patricia said defensively. "I want copies of every single purchase order and receipt by end of business today," Vanessa said firmly. "This is way beyond what was discussed or approved. I was doing my own calculations. 2 sheds, packed to capacity with high-end equipment. At my storage rate of $3 per square foot per month, they would owe me about $38 per day. Every day they delayed removal. "Here is what I propose," I said. "You have until the court's 30-day deadline to remove everything. That gives you 3.5 weeks. The daily storage fee accrues starting from when the sheds were completed, which was 6 days ago. So you currently owe me $230. Every day after today adds another $38. Richard pulled out his phone and typed quickly. "So if removal occurs exactly at the 30-day mark, the total would be approximately $1,140, plus the initial $230. Call it $1,370. That's if removal happens on day 30. Every day after that continues to accrue fees, plus penalties for violating the court order." Patricia looked like she wanted to explode. "This is outrageous. That's extortion." "No," Vanessa said quietly. "It's fair market rate for storage. I checked. Patricia, you created this situation. We need to deal with it and move on." Over the next 2 weeks, I watched with fascination as the HOA descended into chaos. Vanessa's investigation into the expenditures revealed that Patricia had spent nearly $43,000 of HOA funds without proper authorization. She had used creative accounting to hide the purchases across multiple budget categories, slightly under-reporting here, failing to mention items there. At the next regular board meeting, which I attended along with probably 40 other residents, Vanessa presented her findings. The room erupted in anger. People demanded Patricia's resignation. Frank Morrison moved for a vote of no confidence. Carol Dennison, who had been silent through most of the drama, surprised everyone by seconding the motion. Patricia tried to maintain control. I was acting in the best interests of the community. We were spending too much on landscaping contracts. This equipment will save us money long term. "You broke the bylaws," Frank said loudly. "The same bylaws you used to justify building on Aaron's property. You can't pick and choose which rules apply." The vote was overwhelming. Patricia was removed as president effective immediately. Frank was appointed interim president with a special election scheduled for the following month. Martin Walsh quietly resigned from the board entirely. Richard Foster informed everyone that he was withdrawing as the HOA's attorney due to ethical concerns about the advice he had given regarding the shed construction. But the sheds and their contents still sat on my hillside. The deadline was approaching, and I had not received any communication about removal plans. The storage fees were accumulating daily. I sent a formal invoice to Vanessa as the treasurer. She called me the next day. "Aaron, I need your help. We do not have the funds to pay both your storage fees and removal costs. Patricia's overspending left us with a depleted reserve fund. We are looking at needing to levy a special assessment on all homeowners to cover this mess. How much are we talking about? Between your fees, removal costs, and restocking our reserves to legal minimums, we are short about $15,000. That's roughly $350 per household for a special assessment. I felt a twinge of guilt. My neighbors did not create this problem, Patricia did. But legally, I was entitled to the storage fees. What if we work out a payment plan? I suggested. I will accept monthly payments over 6 months for the storage fees, no interest, but the sheds need to come down immediately. Get quotes for removal, and I will see if I can help offset some costs. Vanessa was quiet for a moment. You would do that, after everything Patricia screwed up. The rest of you are just trying to fix it. I don't want to punish the whole neighborhood. We worked out an agreement. The HOA would pay me $700 upfront, covering the current storage fees, and the remaining amount would be paid over 6 months. In exchange, I would donate $500 back to the HOA General Fund to help with removal costs, and would not charge any additional storage fees once removal began. The sheds came down over a weekend. A crew with a crane lifted each structure off its foundation, broke them down into panels, and hauled everything away. The equipment was moved to a proper commercial storage facility that Frank had negotiated a discounted rate for. The concrete pads were jackhammered out, and a landscaping company restored the hillside to its natural state, replanting native grasses and shrubs. But the story did not end there. 3 weeks after the sheds were removed, I received a call from a Detective Sarah Mills with the Boulder Police Department. Mr. Quincy, I am investigating allegations of financial misconduct involving your HOA. I understand you were involved in a legal dispute with the former president, Patricia Hendricks. My stomach dropped. Yes, that's correct. What's this about? Can you come to the station to give a statement? It would be helpful to our investigation. I met with Detective Mills the next afternoon. She was in her 40s, with short dark hair and a direct manner that reminded me of Judge Hayward. She recorded our conversation as I explained the entire situation from the unauthorized construction to the financial irregularities Vanessa discovered. Did you know that Miss Hendricks has a history of similar behavior? Detective Mills asked. I found out about previous HOA disputes when I was researching my case, yes. What we have discovered goes deeper than HOA disputes. She has been involved in 3 separate incidents across 2 states where she held positions of financial authority and was accused of misappropriating funds. 2 were settled quietly. 1 resulted in her being barred from serving on a non-profit board in Arizona. So this is a pattern. It appears so. In this case, our forensic accountant has been reviewing your HOA's records at the request of your current board president. We have found evidence that Ms. Hendricks diverted approximately $18,000 of HOA funds to her personal accounts over the past 2 years. I sat back in my chair. How did she manage that? She set up vendor accounts with fictional companies, landscaping services that were never performed, maintenance contracts that did not exist. She would write checks to these fake vendors and deposit them in accounts she controlled. The shed construction and equipment purchases were just the most visible part of a much larger scheme. Has she been arrested? Not yet. We are building our case. I wanted to talk to you because your civil case created a paper trail that helped expose the deeper fraud. The inventory you conducted, Vanessa Ortiz's investigation into the purchases, all of that documentation is proving invaluable. Over the next month, I watched as the investigation unfolded. Detective Mills was thorough. She interviewed every board member, past and present. She obtained bank records, purchase orders, and contractor statements. The local newspaper, the Daily Camera, picked up the story. HOA president accused of embezzling thousands. Patricia Hendricks was arrested on a Tuesday morning. I heard about it from Frank, who called me with a mixture of satisfaction and sadness in his voice. They charged her with theft, embezzlement, and fraud, he said. Multiple counts. She could be looking at serious prison time. How is the community handling it? Mixed feelings. Some people are angry, feel betrayed. Others feel bad for her husband and kids. But mostly, we are just trying to move forward. The special election happened as scheduled. Frank won the presidency officially. Vanessa remained as treasurer. 2 new board members were elected, both committed to transparency and following proper procedures. The neighborhood started to heal, but I still had to deal with the aftermath on my property. The hillside had been restored, but the whole experience left me thinking about that land differently. It was no longer just an unused slope. It was the battleground where I had learned important lessons about standing up for yourself, about the importance of documentation, and about how even small positions of power can corrupt people who are inclined that way. I decided to do something positive with the space. I hired a landscape architect to design a native plant garden on the hillside. We terraced sections of it, installed water-wise plants that attracted pollinators, and created a winding path that led from my deck up to a small viewing platform at the top. The project took 3 months and cost me more than I probably should have spent, but when it was finished, it was beautiful. Neighbors would stop me during walks and compliment the garden. Some asked if they could walk the path, which I always welcomed. Kids from the neighborhood loved climbing up to the viewing platform. What had been a point of conflict became a source of community pride. The criminal case against Patricia took almost a year to wind through the court system. I was subpoenaed to testify at a preliminary hearing, where I recounted the shed construction and the subsequent inventory. My testimony was relatively minor compared to the forensic accountant's detailed breakdown of the financial fraud, but it helped establish the timeline and Patricia's pattern of disregarding legal boundaries. Patricia's attorney tried to paint her actions as simple misunderstandings and poor judgment rather than criminal intent, but the evidence was overwhelming. She had created fake invoices, forged signatures, and systematically stolen from the HOA over an extended period. The unauthorized shed construction was just the most brazen example of her willingness to do whatever she wanted regardless of rules or other people's rights. She eventually took a plea deal to avoid trial. 8 felony counts were reduced to 4. She was sentenced to 3 years in prison, with the possibility of parole after 18 months. She was also ordered to pay full restitution to the HOA, approximately $31,000, plus court costs and fees. Her husband, Tom, who I had met a few times at neighborhood events, quietly put their house up for sale. He had not been involved in any of Patricia's schemes and by all accounts was a decent guy who was horrified by what his wife had done. They had 2 teenage daughters, and I felt terrible for them. They had done nothing wrong but were paying the price for their mother's choices. The house sold quickly to a young couple with a baby. They seemed nice, and they were relieved to learn that the HOA had gotten its act together and was no longer run like a personal fiefdom. 2 years after the whole shed debacle began, I was sitting on my deck on a warm summer evening. The hillside garden was in full bloom, butterflies and bees working the flowers as the sun set. Frank and his wife Linda came over for dinner, along with Vanessa and her husband Carlos. We were grilling burgers and the conversation naturally drifted to the Patricia situation. "I still cannot believe she thought she would get away with it," Linda said. "Building on your property without permission, That's so brazen. I think she had gotten away with smaller things for so long that she felt untouchable, Vanessa said. Every time someone questioned her, she would cite some bylaw or rule and steamroll over them. It became a habit. Frank raised his beer. Here is to Aaron for not backing down. If you had just let them keep the sheds, we might never have found out about the financial fraud. I was just defending my property, I said. I did not set out to expose a criminal conspiracy. But you did, Vanessa insisted. The inventory we did, that was the thread that unraveled everything. Once we started looking closely at HOA expenditures, it all fell apart. Carlos laughed. I still love that you charged them storage fees. That was genius. Calculated spite, I admitted, but legally sound calculated spite. The conversation moved on to other topics, but I found myself reflecting on the whole experience. It had started with noticing those orange surveying stakes on my hillside, and had spiraled into a legal battle, a criminal investigation, and ultimately a prison sentence for someone who thought she was above the rules. The following year, Frank decided not to run for re-election as HOA president. He had done a good job stabilizing things, but he wanted to enjoy retirement without the administrative headaches. A woman named Rachel Chen, a project manager at a local tech company, ran for the position on a platform of efficiency and transparency. She won easily. One of Rachel's first initiatives was to review and revise the HOA bylaws to make them clearer and prevent the kind of ambiguity that Patricia had exploited. She formed a committee of residents, including an attorney who lived in the neighborhood, to draft new language. I was asked to serve on the committee, and I agreed. We spent 6 months working through every section of the bylaws, clarifying language, removing contradictions, and establishing clear procedures for everything from board elections to expenditure approvals. The revised bylaws were presented to the community in a series of well-attended meetings, then put to a vote. They passed with 92% approval. The new bylaws explicitly stated that private property remained private property regardless of terrain, buildability, or any other factor. They established strict spending limits for the board and required transparent reporting of all expenditures over $500. They created a process for homeowners to appeal board decisions and established term limits for board members. It was boring, tedious work, but it felt important. We were building safeguards to prevent future Patricias from abusing their positions. Around that time, I started dating Valerie Owens, a teacher at a local elementary school who lived on the other side of Boulder. We had met at a friend's barbecue, hit it off immediately, and had been seeing each other for about 3 months when I told her the shed story. Wait, she said, laughing so hard she had tears in her eyes. She built entire storage sheds on your property and then you charged her rent for them. That's the most passive-aggressive, brilliant thing I have ever heard. In my defense, I tried to stop her from building them in the first place. Oh, I am not criticizing. I think it's amazing. Did you really make her pay storage fees? The HOA paid, not her personally. And I only collected about $700 before we settled. I gave some of it back to help with removal costs, because you are a nice person. Because my neighbors did not deserve to be punished for Patricia's mistakes. Valerie smiled at me. That's why you are a nice person. We were sitting in my living room, and she looked out the glass doors at the hillside garden, lit by landscape lighting as evening fell. Is that where the sheds were? Right about there, yeah. I pointed to where the 2 viewing platforms now stood. It's beautiful. You turned something negative into something the whole community can enjoy. Tried to, anyway. She squeezed my hand. You succeeded. 18 months after her sentencing, Patricia Hendricks was released on parole. I heard about it through the neighborhood grapevine. She had moved to Grand Junction, Colorado, where she was living with a sister and working retail. Part of her parole conditions prohibited her from serving in any fiduciary capacity or holding positions of financial authority. I wondered sometimes if she had learned anything from the experience or if she still felt justified in her actions, viewing herself as a victim of overzealous prosecution and a vindictive homeowner. I hoped for the former but suspected the latter. Tom and the girls were doing okay, according to what Frank had heard. Tom was working as an accountant in Denver and both daughters had gone to college. They had survived their mother's choices and were building their own lives. That was good to hear. 3 years after the shed incident, Valerie and I got engaged. I proposed on the viewing platform at the top of my hillside garden, which had become our favorite spot to watch the sunset. She said yes, and we started planning a small wedding for the following summer. We decided to get married in my backyard, which by that point had become something of a neighborhood gathering place. The hillside garden provided a stunning backdrop, and the upper platform was perfect for the ceremony. We invited about 50 people, mostly close friends and family, plus several neighbors who had become good friends through the whole HOA ordeal Frank officiated. He had gotten ordained online specifically for our wedding. During the ceremony, he told the story of how Valerie and I met, and then could not resist adding, Aaron once defended his property against an illegal construction project and turned a disaster into something beautiful, which is probably good practice for marriage. You take the challenges life throws at you and make something positive out of them. Everyone laughed. Valerie squeezed my hand and whispered, "He is not wrong." The reception was catered by a local restaurant, and we set up tables throughout the yard. As the sun set and the lights came on, I looked around at all the people celebrating with us and felt genuinely happy. The property that had been the source of so much conflict was now hosting one of the best days of my life. During the reception, Vanessa came up to me with her husband Carlos. "I never properly thanked you," she said, "for everything that happened with Patricia. If you had not pushed back against the shed construction, I never would have looked into the finances. She would have kept stealing from the HOA. You did the hard work investigating and exposing it," I said. "I just made her mad enough to make mistakes. Still, you stood up when it would have been easier to just let it go. That matters." 4 years after the shed incident, the HOA newsletter featured a retrospective article about the Patricia Hendricks case and the reforms that had been implemented as a result. Rachel Chen wrote most of it, with input from the board. She interviewed me for the piece. "What do you think was the most important lesson from that experience?" she asked. I thought about it. "Document everything. And do not be afraid to stand up for your rights, even when people in authority tell you that you are wrong." Patricia was very confident that she had the law on her side. She cited bylaws and had an attorney backing her up. It would have been easy to be intimidated and give in. But I knew I was right, and I had documentation to prove it. What about the storage fees? Some people thought that was vindictive. I charged fair market rate for commercial storage. If that seems vindictive, maybe it is because Patricia never should have built on my property in the first place. Play stupid games, win stupid prizes. Rachel laughed. Can I quote that? Sure. The article ran in the newsletter and was surprisingly popular. Several residents told me they appreciated the reminder to stay engaged with HOA business and not assume the board always had things under control. By the 5-year anniversary of the shed incident, the whole thing had taken on an almost legendary quality in the neighborhood. New residents would hear the story and ask to see where the sheds had been. I would take them up the hillside path and point out the locations, which were now just terraced sections of garden, completely indistinguishable from the surrounding landscape. "I cannot believe someone actually built storage sheds on your property without permission," one new neighbor, a guy named Jeff, said during one such tour. "That is insane." "It was a weird time," I agreed. "And you really charged them storage fees?" "I really did." He shook his head in amazement. "That is the most Colorado thing I have ever heard, turning a property dispute into a business transaction." I had not thought about it that way, but he was not entirely wrong. Instead of just being angry and demanding removal, I had recognized an opportunity. Patricia had placed valuable property on my land without permission. That created a legal relationship where I could charge for storage. It was not vindictive. It was logical. Valerie and I welcomed our first child, a daughter we named Audrey, 6 years after the shed incident. By that point, the whole situation had faded into neighborhood history. Patricia Hendricks was a cautionary tale, a reminder of why HOA oversight and engagement mattered, but no longer an active concern. I found myself thinking about it sometimes, though, usually when I was walking the hillside path with Audrey in a carrier, pointing out butterflies and birds. This property, which I had bought partially because nobody else wanted to deal with the steep slope, had become the center of some of the most stressful and ultimately transformative experiences of my life. If Patricia had not tried to build on my hillside, I never would have fought back. If I had not fought back, the financial fraud might have continued for years, draining the HOA's resources and potentially creating real financial hardship for residents. If the whole situation had not created such neighborhood drama, I might not have gotten as involved in community affairs, might not have met some of the people who became close friends. It was strange how a single act of administrative overreach had rippled through so many lives. Patricia was in Grand Junction, having served her time and trying to rebuild. Tom and the girls had moved on with their lives. The HOA had reformed its governance and was running smoothly under competent leadership. I had a beautiful wife, a new daughter, and a hillside garden that brought me joy every day. Looking back, if I could go back to that moment when I first saw the orange surveying stakes, would I do anything differently? Probably not. I stood up for my rights, used the legal system properly, and turned a conflict into an opportunity. I protected my property, exposed fraud, and helped my community implement better safeguards. And I charged Patricia Hendricks's HOA storage fees for keeping their equipment on my private hillside, which still makes me smile when I think about it. It was petty, yes, but it was legally sound petty. The best kind. The hillside garden stands as a permanent reminder of those events. What Patricia intended as a power play, building on property she did not own, became the catalyst for positive change. The sheds came down, the fraud was exposed, the reforms were implemented, and the land was transformed into something beautiful that benefited everyone. Sometimes I give tours to visiting friends or family, showing them the terraced gardens, the winding path, and the viewing platforms. They always want to hear the story, and I tell them about the orange surveying stakes, the unauthorized construction, the court battle, and yes, the storage fees. Their reactions are always similar. Disbelief that someone would be so bold, appreciation for how I handled it, and amusement at the storage fee angle. It makes for a good story, which is probably why I have told it so many times over the years. But more than just a good story, it is a reminder of important principles. Private property rights matter. Documentation matters. Standing up to people who abuse authority matters. And sometimes, when life hands you an illegally constructed storage shed on your property, you charge storage fees until they take it down. That is exactly what I did, and I would do it again.